Huzzah! All right, so I will start just by introducing myself, and then we can go around the Zoom and everybody can introduce themselves. So my name is Robin Kelby. I use they, them pronouns, and I am the Southwest District lay leader. So part of my job is doing trainings and really trying to support the laity, especially in my own district, but folks from other districts are fun too. So I'm just really glad that, folks are able to join from wherever they are on this bright and slightly snowy February Saturday. So let's see, advance my slide. All right, so I am just going to call out folks to do introductions because everybody has a different order for where folks are at. So if everybody could introduce themselves with their name, the church that they're from, how long you've been a lay member to annual conference, and then a fun fact. It doesn't have to, it shouldn't be one of the 3 facts above, but just, something fun about yourself. So I'll start with Nan.
Well, I'm trying to figure out how to get a different view here. Hi, my name is Nan Owen Hookman. I am the lay leader and lay member from Cudahy United Methodist Church. What else were we supposed to say?
It should be on the slide. So church.
Let's see, lay member. Longer than I can remember. It's not the most popular job in most churches. And a fun fact about what would be fun? I suppose I also get the joy of being the director of our community youth and education center. And this year we are doing a program called MOCA, Make Our Community Kind Again. And we're spending a whole year on it with classes and challenges and just stuff to make people aware that kindness counts.
Well, thank you, Nan. Let's continue with Jolene.
I'm Jolene Gudgeon. I am from the Viroqua United Methodist Church, and I've been a lay member to annual conference for 4 years. And a fun fact is I've been a member of the bell choir there for, it's going on my 33rd year.
Oh, that's lovely. Let's see, next is Patricia.
Hello. I don't know how come I'm not showing up. I haven't got this technology figured out, but I will just tell you my name's Patricia Litsky, and I'm from the Cedarburg United Methodist Church, and I've just begun the tenure as lay leader. I was lay leader back in, I think, the 80s when it was at Green Lake and Stevens Point. And maybe a fun fact is that I'm surprised they asked me because I'm entering my 80th year, and they still guess I can do some of this stuff.
Well, thank you, Patricia. Next is Gwen.
Gwen Gibson. I'm at Emmanuel United Methodist Church in Appleton. And I just became, I guess, a lay member on Wednesday evening.
Lay leader, Gwen.
Yeah, lay leader. I'm sorry.
Well, I think that you win the award for the one with the shortest tenure, so congrats.
I had been previously many years ago, though.
Cool. Next is Sandra.
I'm from the United Methodist Liberty Pole Church. It's about 7 miles from Viroqua, and I've been a lay member for longer than I can remember, probably 20 years or 15 or 20 years. We were at Appleton for a while, or several places before Green Bay. And my screen shows a fair. We always have that screen on there. So my husband's very involved with the fair. That's why that's on there.
Well, I like that, Sandra. Thank you so much. Next is Anne.
Hi, I'm Ann Harold Peterson from First United Methodist Church in Madison, and I've been a lay member, I think, since 2 years before COVID, but since COVID, I can't figure out how long ago anything was anyway. So I think that's 2 to 3 years before COVID. I can't remember. Anyway, fun fact is I like to watercolor paint.
Anything in particular out of curiosity?
Yeah, I like to take photos on vacations and then try to paint scenes from those places. Yeah. So.
Well, that's really cool. And then last but certainly not least, Mike.
Hi, I am Mike Failer, and I'm from Emmanuel United Methodist Church in Appleton, same as Gwen. And we're both new to this. I've been a lay leader before, but this is the first time I've ever been a lay member to annual conference. So I'm not quite 80, but they keep asking me to do other things too. So I guess is that a fun fact? I'm glad to be that old, you know?
I think we can consider that to be fun, or at least you seem fun. So, well, just thank you all so much for being here again. And I'm just going to lead us in an opening prayer. Dear Lord, thank you so much for bringing us together today to be doing the work of your church and really continuing to learn and grow in this role. We pray that you would guide our discussion and help us all to prepare for our annual conference that will be coming up in June. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. So I made this PowerPoint based off of the handout that I sent out in the email. There's one that's like the lay member to annual conference resources. There's another document that's just like good general resources for laity and leadership positions. That's more for you guys to peruse on your own time, but we'll be talking through really what it means to be a lay member to annual conference, things to look out for and prepare for, because registration is now open. So there's just a lot of exciting stuff ahead. So I want to start off with just making sure we're all on the same page. What does it mean in brief to be a lay member to annual conference? And really, lay members to annual conference link their local church to the annual conference as well as the general church. That's kind of the short and sweet definition I came up with. Does anybody have anything else that they would add?
I do have a question.
Yeah.
Why do some churches have only one lay member and other churches have multiple lay members to annual conference? Is it because of the number of members in their church, or it just seems like some churches have more of a voice and more voting than other churches?
I think it is based on membership. But to take a step back and kind of explain why we have lay members. If you look back in our Methodist history, it used to be that lay people didn't have a voice in church polity, which is like the church structure. It was only clergy. And whenever we introduced laity into the equation, we had to somehow figure out how we balance clergy voices against lay voices. And so part of that is that they try to have roughly equal numbers. I mean, they're never going to get it completely exact, but they try to have roughly equal numbers so that the clergy and the laity have roughly equal voice. And part of that is that, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but there is a lot of retired clergy. And the problem is that if you add up all the current clergy and all the retired clergy, then even if you have, a single person from every church plus lay equalization, which is to try to, close that gap between laity and clergy, that perhaps is one of the reasons why some churches have multiple. I think that it's all part of that balancing equation, trying to make sure that there's enough of a voice of people who are laity, which is anybody who isn't clergy in the church. But honestly, I have not done a ton of digging into exactly which churches have, which numbers of people. I think that what I've seen so far is that larger churches tend to have 2 as opposed to 1, but according to the discipline, it's generally just like one layperson per church. So the other thing about that is that if you have multiple churches that share a pastor, so if you have, a 2-point charge, 3-point charge, then you'll still have one person per church as opposed to one person for the 3 churches representing the charge. Does that make sense so far? Cool. So I mentioned the discipline before, but it's always a good thing to look at for these kinds of things. Paragraph 25, paragraph 251.2 governs the responsibilities and requirements for lay members to annual conference. And in terms of, how annual conference is actually structured, there's also some mentions in paragraph 602, points 4 through 7. So I basically pulled some of the language that's in there into my sheet. So just in case you don't happen to have a copy of the discipline in front of you, we can still be, looking at what it says. So in terms of what the requirements are for this volunteer position, a lay member is elected at a charge conference. We generally hold these in the fall or early winter, but you can also just call a special charge conference. So let's say somebody wasn't elected in the fall and you still want to send somebody to annual conference, you can still have a special charge conference to elect them there. Lay members also must be a professing member of a local church in good standing for at least 2 years before their election, and they have to be an active participant in the United Methodist Church for at least 4 years. That's mostly just to make sure that you have been a United Methodist long enough that you kind of know, what the structure of the church is. You're not just a complete newbie. And then finally, you can have alternate lay members elected as a backup, just in case the lay member is unable to serve. This can be useful in cases where maybe somebody gets sick or they, cannot serve that year for whatever reason. You can elect an alternate to go in their place. So that way we're still trying to fill that laity seat to represent that church. Does this make sense so far?
Yes.
All right. So let's actually look at the Book of Discipline for what it says about the responsibilities of the lay member. So the lay member of the annual conference and alternates shall be elected annually or quadrennially as the annual conference directs. If the charge's lay representative to the annual conference shall cease to be a member of the charge or shall for any reason fail to serve, an alternate member in the order of election shall serve in place. Both the lay members and alternates shall have been professing members in good standing of the United Methodist Church for at least 2 years and shall have been active participants for at least 4 years next preceding their election, except in a newly organized church, which shall have the privilege of representation at the annual conference session. No local pastor shall be eligible as a lay member or alternate. And United Methodist churches that become part of an ecumenical shared ministry shall not be deprived of their right of representation by a lay member in the annual conference. The lay member of the annual conference, along with the pastor, shall serve as an interpreter of the actions of the annual conference session. These persons shall report to the local church council on actions of the annual conference as soon as possible, but no later than 3 months after the close of the conference. Oh, and I didn't keep up my slides. Whoops. And finally, the lay member participates in the annual conference sessions and votes on all matters except those pertaining to ministerial relations, and serves as a member of the charge conference, church council, finance committee, and staff pastor parish relations. So I know that's a lot that I just threw at you, and I figured that we could start off with just some discussion questions to try to digest some of this information and, you know, figure out what it's really talking about. So one of the things that struck me is that it says that, you know, the lay member shall have the privilege of representation. Do you have any thoughts on, you know, what that means and how that feels? One of the things that came to my mind is that, you know, annual conference can be pretty tough. There's a lot of important things that you have to vote on. There's a lot of difficult and stressful and hard things to vote on as well. That, you know, there are some votes where it really doesn't make you feel good that you have to vote a certain way. So I think that part of it is that, you know, as difficult as annual conference is, it's also a privilege to be able to be in that space and have that voice. For the next one, why do you think the discipline stipulates that a lay member of annual conference cannot be a local pastor?
I think part of it is the fact that licensed local pastors are actually clergy. And they have a portion of what the clergy votes for that they are allowed to vote for. I understand there are going to be things sent to general conference trying to increase what licensed local pastors are able to vote on. Because really, yeah, our pastor is a licensed local, and I hear her side of it a lot in the fact that she feels she's made less than because she can't vote on everything.
Exactly.
And that's really not fair with the increasing number of licensed local pastors that we're getting, because we don't have ordained clergy to fill every pulpit. So I
And
can
ordination
understand why
isn't,
pardon me?
yeah, I mean, ordination isn't for everybody too. I think that it's a great option for those that just, for whatever portion of time of their life that they're in, that they can still definitely serve very well. Sorry, continue.
I was just going to say that we are getting so many more licensed local pastors, exactly for the reason that you mentioned, that they're, let's face it, if at six, well, let's see. Lynn, I believe, was in her 50s when she was called. You're not going to go and spend all that time in seminary before you can serve, because by that time you'll hit the mandatory retirement age and it's all going to be for nothing. Whereas with the licensed local pastor program, you continue the education throughout the time, but you have the ability to serve as well. So
yeah, I think that's one of the important points about this, is that not all clergy are treated equally at the moment in terms of what they can vote on. And that means that as a lay member to annual conference, you can vote on more things than licensed local pastors can. So I believe that's why that's in there, is because they don't want a licensed local pastor to try to, you know, fill that role and be able to vote on more things and really take the voice away from laity in their local church. So
Robin,
I think,
I have a question, because I'm not that familiar with the term local pastor. Now, I'm assuming that just means the unordained. And we have not had that many around in the area, but they do not have to go where they're told. They cannot be told where to go. They have choices, more choices than ordained pastors. Is that part of it?
Not, it's sort of. So essentially, if you think about ordination, that process involves going to seminary and a whole candidacy process that lasts about 3 years. It's a very involved process. The alternative is being a licensed local pastor, where instead you do something called course of study. It is still a lot of schooling you have to take. I believe there's, I'm trying to remember back to my days on DCOM, but it essentially it's kind of being able to do that kind of advanced training, but more at your own pace, a couple classes a year, rather than devoting your entire life to going to school again. And with that, you're generally, oh shoot, I'm getting a call. Let me make this go away. All right. Sorry about that. In terms of licensed local pastors, like being able to go to course of study, they can do that while they are serving a local church, as opposed to having to really devote yourself to study and then serve. So it's just a lot more flexible for folks where maybe they're only half time, they have a day job, and yet they are still very skilled and very much want to serve as in a pastoral role. So it's something that is one of the avenues available if you're feeling a call to ministry and trying to figure out, you know, what path best fits you. So does that make sense for what a local pastor is?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks. So what is the importance of reporting to the local church council about the actions of the annual conference?
Well, that just keeps the connection, it makes sure that the local church knows what's going on in the annual conference meeting. If you're going to be a representative, you need to be able to tell the people you're representing what happened.
Definitely. And I think that that's something that, you know, how you do that kind of communication is something that really is particular to your own church and how you all communicate. I think that you can not only announce it to the church council, you could announce it to the whole church. That could be in person during worship services. It could be a separate session outside of church, you know, maybe on a Sunday afternoon or evening. There's just a lot of different ways you could tackle it, but it's just really important for the rest of the church to know what it was like from somebody who was there. And I mean, sometimes there can be a lot of hearsay around annual conference and, you know, people talking about what they think went on as opposed to what actually went on. So.
I would think that would be, I would think, this is Pat again. I would think
Yeah.
that was one of the main things would be that the misinformation that's out there that people can find online or wherever else it shows that it's jaded, so to speak. You can help people be clarified a little bit more about what's going on.
Exactly. It's a real teaching opportunity for not just what happens at annual conference, but more of what the broader organization and, you know, ministry out there is like. So there's one thing that, you know, whenever I read that, it first confused me. What do you think is included in the ministerial relations, that it says that it's like the only thing that lay members can't vote on? Do you have any idea what that could be? So for those of you that have gone to annual conference before, there is something called the clergy session, which is where they have some business that is just for clergy to vote on. So the nice thing is that they handle all of those ministerial relations actions and votes in that session. So whenever you're before the body at annual conference, as a lay member, there's nothing that you have to worry about. Can I vote on this or not? Like, everything that comes before the body is something you can vote on. It would only be if somehow you're shadowing in the clergy session, which you generally don't go to, that, you know, you would have to worry about, you know, can I vote or can I not? And the clergy session is held separately from the rest of the annual conference business. So it's like announced separately. And we have the equivalent, something called the laity session, which is a session just for laity to go over some of the, different things that go on in the conference, specific reports and resolutions that may be coming up that we want to give people a heads up about. So really, that's kind of what it's talking about for, what all you can vote on and what you can't. Does that make sense?
There's another piece to this, though, that's involves the Board of Ordained Ministry, which also has lay members on it, which I'm on the board, so I'm going to speak for the board. So if you're a lay member on the Board of Ordained Ministry, you do go to the clergy session and you also vote at the clergy session.
Oh, cool. I didn't know that. Thank you for the topic from Boom.
Well, it's interesting because since we've been doing the GNTV thing online, every year so far that we've been doing that, my ID number doesn't work to vote at the clergy session because they don't seem to understand that. So they'll always have to go back and get that clarified. But anyway, this is kind of a commercial that if you're a lay person and are interested in being on the Board of Ordained Ministry, we do have openings.
Well, thank you so much for that, Anne. You're copied on the resources email, so I think folks can find you if they're interested. But thank you so much. I love having other people have commercials. Let's see. I got one last question on this slide. So are there other laity who have voice and vote at annual conference beside lay members? Well, you're looking at one. So there's a select group of laity that serve in different conference positions like I do. As a district lay leader, whenever I took on that role, I no longer represent my church, I represent myself, which meant I had to find a new lay member for my own church, which is Sugar River in Verona. And yeah, so that was fun to have these kinds of conversations with somebody to try to figure out, who can serve and what it's really like. So there's not a ton of laity besides lay members that are part of, the laity part of annual conference. But there are also lay equalization members, which again, they might not be elected from their church, but they just help to balance the numbers between laity and clergy, so it's roughly equal. Are there any other questions you have at this time before we move on, based off of what we read out of the discipline? Looks good. All right. So one thing that is always good to clarify is how the lay leader and the lay member to annual conference, different roles are related. Because a lot of times we want to use them interchangeably and they're just a little bit different. So a church's lay leader and lay member to annual conference may be the same person. This is actually encouraged by the Book of Discipline. If you look at the section that's talking about lay leaders. And both roles are really focused on linking the local church to the broader community and the world. So a lot of times it does make sense logistically for that to be the same person in a church. However, the lay member to annual conference is more focused on connecting to church structures, like a local church's district and the annual conference, as well as the actions of general and jurisdictional conferences. Lay leaders are primarily focused on developing and advocating for leadership in the local church as a means of growing disciples. Depending on the gifts of those involved, it may make sense for one person to do both roles, or it may be better suited for two people. But regardless, if they are two people, then the lay leader and the lay member must be able to collaborate and be able to have communication. So is there any questions or clarification on those roles? I know we like to shove lay in front of everything, so that can get really confusing. All right. So the next thing I want to take us through is the kinds of leadership skills that as a lay member to annual conference, really you should be working to cultivate. The first is advocacy. Lay members are elected from their local congregation, but they ultimately vote as individuals. Lay members have a responsibility to earnestly consider the resolutions and reports before the body and be informed about the impacts that these actions may have. The second thing is nurturing. United Methodism has historically been strongest when its laity are empowered to do the work of the church. Clergy can't carry the whole church by themselves. So it's really the work of a lay member to encourage the people of your church to take an interest in what goes on at annual conference through your report to the congregation. Next is communication. I feel like it's a big one for lay members. Lay members must effectively express themselves in meetings, worship, and conversations with individuals and groups. Additionally, as a lay member, you have voice at annual conference, which means that you can request to speak for or against motions that come before the body. And they'll tell you to go to a microphone and then, speak your piece, and you'll have a few minutes in order to make your statement. So what that means is be prepared to have the courage to speak up if you feel led in front of a room of hundreds. And the flip side is to actively listen to what folks are bringing before the body. Use your voice and vote to lift up what matters in your context. Next is service. As a servant leader, lay members should be active in and connected to the ministries of their local church. While the lay member can't be everywhere at once, they should have relationships with all the different ministries of the church. That includes Sunday school classes, youth groups, women and men's groups, Bible studies, food pantries, etc. And keep these ministries in mind through the business of annual conference. They may be impacted by the actions that we take. And finally, annual conference takes a lot of preparation and study. If you are employed or otherwise have regular commitments, make sure to make arrangements as soon as you can so that you'll be able to attend all of conference. The laity session will be held before conference, like a week or two before. I'm not sure if the date's live yet, so I'm not going to tell you just in case I'm wrong. But there'll be that session to attend to get you familiar with what's going to be happening, as well as the pre-conference workbook and other conference materials that'll be available a few weeks ahead of time. So the thing to keep in mind is develop a general knowledge of the Book of Discipline, and it's best to have a copy available for reference. That can be either a physical hardcover copy, or there's a free version on Cokesbury's website that you can search. So that can be really useful if you're looking for a specific paragraph. Then instead of having to flip through, you can just search for that paragraph number and there. So with all of that said, are there any questions about the kinds of leadership skills that, I don't think that everybody's going to be great at everything, but you have to at least be working toward.
I'm new to this, and
Yeah.
this laity session and the pre-conference workbook, will we get that and those materials before the laity session?
Yes. I
Okay.
can actually show you, I have, let me actually check my slides. Yeah. So I'm going to stop sharing my PowerPoint for a sec, and I'm actually going to show you what these materials look like from last year. Because that can just be useful for trying to figure out, okay, I got all these documents and I need to figure out what I'm doing with them. So let me change the share. All right. Share. All right, so I'm going to start with the pre-conference workbook. So on the pre-conference workbook, for last year, you can see that it was 54 pages. That is actually inflated because usually we do not have a great big action item that is putting together how disaffiliation works. So there's one action item that was like 20 pages long. So usually it's somewhere more like, I don't know, 30 to 40 pages. And really what it contains is a lot of action items that some of them are stuff that we have to pass every single year. So, you know, they just kind of are what they are. For instance, a lot of these first action items like the WC 101 through 103, all of these resolutions and action items just get passed every single year. They're not different. They just, every time annual conference meets, we have to make sure that we have our session rules, our consent agenda of things we just pass ahead of time, as well as certain special Sundays, nominations, other resolutions that just, they are what they are. So there's really no like surprises or things you particularly have to like study terribly hard. There's other resolutions and reports, like for instance, in the WC 104 group is pensions, equitable compensation, and insurance. These usually are setting dates for the upcoming year. So in 2022, we were voting on 2023. This year we'll be voting on 2024. And those are ones where you just, you know, can kind of chart, you know, are the rates the same or are they increased? You know, does that make sense based off of things like inflation and all that good stuff? Those are kind of what I look out for there. And then there may be some action items that are changing conference rules, conference policies. If there are any churches that are being discontinued or closed, then those get voted on. And then there will usually be different resolutions for things like resolutions that just impact our annual conference. So that'd be the state of Wisconsin, as opposed to resolutions that'd be going to general conference next year in 2024 that we wouldn't be approving those to just be for us. We'd be approving them to be sent to general conference for consideration. So as you're preparing, you know, watch out for that, because that's kind of different, has a little bit different rules for, you know, what we're kind of thinking about. And then one of the things that will also be in here is an action item for the nominations report. Usually that will not be included in this document. It's usually a separate one because it's just a lot of names for a lot of different positions, different kinds of roles and such for let's see, I'll just go over to it right now. So in this case, there's just a lot of names for different boards and agencies that we just have to make sure have the time and attention and focus that they need to keep going. So I usually just kind of scroll through and like, I'm part of the Southwest District. So, you know, for ones where I'm like, you know, trying to see, oh, well, who is the, you know, person from the Southwest District on a thing, you know. And then finally, sometimes there can be action items that are added on after the pre-conference workbook. So for instance, last year, there was a resolution on gun violence that we received it through email after annual conference started. And it was one of those where if we had time, we could address it. Otherwise, it would get tabled. And we happened to have time last year, so we were able to vote on it. So there's just one of those in that kind of a category, but that can happen. So, you know, as you're kind of compiling materials, just know that the pre-conference workbook is our best guess at the time, but things may change. The only other thing that I would mention ahead of like annual conference preparations and like materials and stuff is that we will be voting on a special resolution this year, which will be for disaffiliation. So all this past year, we have been working with churches that wish to step away from the United Methodist Church based on issues of human sexuality. And the way it's going to work is that once churches have completed the pathway and all of the requirements that they need to, that is a lot of legal paperwork. They have to have a 2/3 vote of their professing membership that show up to a charge conference. And then finally, a financial payment that covers 2 years of apportionments, pension liabilities, lots of things that make sure that, you know, the rest of United Methodist churches that stay are protected. Once they have completed all of those steps and the annual conference has, you know, rubber stamped that they're ready, then they will appear on a resolution like this, all in one ballot to be voted on. So if 20 churches, 30 churches all meet those requirements, then we'll just have one vote over all of them rather than having to vote on them separately, because that would just get old. So that is something where, you know, last year we passed a very extensive pathway with a, you know, really high bar of making sure that, you know, both the churches that are, you know, wishing to step away as well as churches remaining are protected. So I would just encourage that, you know, be in prayer as we get that resolution, because it's going to be a difficult conversation. And I hope that we're able to, you know, allow these churches to leave because they have done so much good work and put in so much good faith through this process. So just one of the things that is going to be weird about this year that we generally don't do, but I figured I would give you a heads up. I've been part of the Southwest team for disaffiliation and helping with this process. So yeah, just wanted to touch on that so that you all be aware. This is going to be a banner year for stuff because we're preparing for General Conference. We may be electing delegates. I think that has not been completely settled yet of so what parts of our delegation that was supposed to go to 2020 and then couldn't will serve for 2024, or if we will have some that will wish to step away and have others elected in their place. As well as folks that have, you know, otherwise not been able to serve or have passed away, and we need to fill those slots. So does that kind of give you an idea of the kinds of business that we'll be seeing at annual conference?
Yeah, I think so.
Cool.
Our past members have given me a booklet, so I'm aware of most of this stuff. I just wasn't aware of the timing of getting certain materials. So thank you.
Yeah, I think it should be coming out here decently soon, within like the next month or two, because I mean, it's coming up and you need a lot of time to review it. So that is something that our program committee for annual conference is working very hard on. Let's see, I'm going to switch back to my PowerPoint. Do it. And, oh, come on. Thank you for bearing with me. And here we go. All right. So can you see my slides again?
Yes.
Aha. All right. So next thing I want to talk about is how you prepare for annual conference, because there's a lot to do. The first step is making sure you're signed up for the conference e-news at www.wisconsinumc.org. They send out emails once a week, as well as periodically, like whenever the bishop has his soul food that he sends out and other stuff. But that's really a good way to make sure that you're, you know, keeping up to date with events going on and stuff if you're not already. The second thing is to mark your calendar. This year's session is June 9th through 12th, and the lady session will be held virtually before conference. That date will be announced. That's going to be decently close to annual conference, somewhere like 2 to 3 weeks beforehand. So that is dates to mark on your calendar. And the lady session will be like 2 hours in an evening on Zoom, so it's not like an all-day affair or anything. Something to note with the dates is that the 12th, which is a Monday, is going to be an extra learning day. So If you work like I do, I am not going to be there on the 12th because I need to get back to work, but I'll be taking the 9th, which is a Friday, off to be there. Another thing to work on is coordinating with other folks from your congregation or area. Is there anybody that might be interested in sharing a hotel room or carpooling with you? Are other people planning on getting the meal plan, or are they getting outside food? Be thinking about those things, because a lot of times it can just be easier if you know who's going to be in your group of people that you know. And then check your church's budget to see if there is funding to offset the costs of attending annual conference. Be planning ahead for the costs of registration, hotel, meals, gas, whatever else applies. And that is something to consider if your church doesn't currently have a budget item for this. Might want to think about adding it, because it can get pretty expensive to be getting a hotel room for several nights. Registration is like, I think 180, something like that. I haven't actually registered for this year yet. I need to do that, but it is now open to be looking through those things for like the different costs and stuff.
Robin, if I could mention, it would be a very good idea for folks to look into the hotel as soon as possible, because the conference does block off a certain number of rooms that are at a reduced cost. And we've already been looking at it because pastor needs certain things, mobility things within the room. So if you're planning on staying at the hotel that the conference is in, it's a good idea to get your hotel reservation ASAP. They really fill up fast. And then you're stuck looking for alternatives that aren't way out of line price-wise.
Definitely. The convention center that we use is the K something. Thank you. I kept thinking K9 and that was wrong. So the KI Convention Center has a hotel that's just right attached. So that is going to be the closest option for if you just want to park your car once and be there and not really leave. There are also other hotels in Green Bay that they do have those like contracted lower rates for. I stayed at one last year where it was like a quarter mile walk or something, which I thought was nice, but then I was afraid it might rain. So just be thinking about those kinds of things. If you are planning on like having a hotel and that is elsewhere and then driving in, there may be costs to parking in the parking garage that's like across the street. So just be thinking about the logistics early. That way you don't get caught out, especially if you have concerns that you'll just need to make sure handled early. Thank you for that, Nan.
Welcome.
I already kind of talked about this, but register whenever you can. I believe the early bird dates are sometime in May, but I wouldn't wait that long. You should also be talking with your pastor and or church secretary to determine how registration is going to be handled. In some churches, you may be registering yourself. And for others, they might just be registering you along with the pastor and whoever else may be going. So just make sure you know exactly how that process works. As somebody who serves on the conference board of laity, I have my own process I got to figure out. So that's one of the reasons why I've been putting it off for a few days. The next thing, we already talked about this a little bit, is, read that conference workbook and discuss the action items with others that will be attending. Really try to think through, do you understand what the action item means? And I wouldn't take anything that's in the pre-conference workbook, with the exception of the things that just get voted on every single year that we really don't mess with. Be thinking about, are there any amendments that you would want to make? Nothing is really set in stone until we actually, put forward the motion. So, for example, a few years ago, there was an example of language in a resolution that really wasn't Wesleyan. that, you know, we could kind of understand where it was coming from, but it wasn't really something that represented us well. And so there was an amendment just to change, you know, that one piece of the language to better reflect our views. And so the way that works is that the amendment gets voted on first for whether or not it's accepted. And then you vote on the amended motion, so that the whole shebang in a second vote. So be thinking about those kinds of things. And if you have questions and nobody that's in your group really has any idea of what's going on, feel free to reach out to conference folks. There may be resources on the conference website for some things that are particularly sticky. Or it might be a good question to ask in front of the body at annual conference, just to make sure that everybody in the room is on the same page. So does that make sense for what you should really be looking for with the workbook?
Yeah.
All right. So next thing is attend that laity session and then familiarize yourself with the annual conference schedule once that's posted. You will usually have that finalized closer to annual conference with exactly like what rooms will be in at the convention center, that kind of a thing. But the business and worship sessions tend to be from like roughly 9 a.m. to about 5 p.m. Because there's a lot on our plates this year, that might be a little bit extended. It might go into the evening. I'm not sure. But the program committee is working on figuring out how we can use our time as wisely as possible to get through both the business we need to, as well as having time for worship and praise and really good other things to get our minds off of the business. So, all right. Do you have any
Rob.
questions, or have I missed any preparation steps that you take?
Hey, Robin, can you hear me okay?
I can. Hi, AJ.
Hi, sorry I was a little late arrival. I've already registered, and in my registration, there is a laity session that shows up on the 24th of May from 6 to 8 p.m. on the registration.
Oh, good. That's
Yeah.
great. Yeah.
So
It's
your
one of those where,
the secret is out.
well, that's the thing. I knew that the Conference Board of Laity was working on it, but I hadn't been in those discussions for knowing if the date had actually been confirmed yet. So I didn't want to spill the beans, but thank you for having that. Because yeah.
And I don't remember how because I was looking over the shoulder of our church secretary when we were filling out all this stuff. So I'm thinking there just was a radio button that was pushed, and but I was just looking at it, and it's on the registration confirmation thingamajiggy. So
Yeah, there'll be a separate Zoom link that they'll send out. So make sure that whenever you're getting registered that they select that little button, because that way you'll get the information. And it could be an opportunity, you know, since it will be on Zoom, if you want to get together with some other folks from your church or area, feel free to just watch it together and do it that way. It can be flexible.
The hours again, please, for the late.
The 24th of May from 6 to 8 p.m. online.
Thank you.
Yeah. I always really get a kick out of it because it's really nice to just kind of have a heads up for things that are happening. And there's really good opportunities for being able to just see, like, for instance, we really want to make sure that if there are lay delegates that may be voted on, that we're able to introduce them to that body, because laity vote on laity delegates and clergy votes on clergy. So we don't particularly have to care about the clergy, but for laity, we need to make sure that we know who these people are. It's like any kind of other election, that if they're going to be representing us, then we should know what their background is and how they're going to approach that really important role going to general or jurisdictional conference. And I'm checking my calendar because I'm just curious. Yeah, that May 24th is on a Wednesday night, FYI.
Robin?
Yeah.
Another question. Have they decided what the special, shall we say, is going to be for every year? You know, we have the one banquet. It's usually Saturday evening's meal, and there is a presentation of some type. I know it's important only because we have to choose that meal at registration. And have they said yet what's going to be highlighted or anything?
I haven't heard yet. So if you're in that registration process, it might say it in there. I'm not sure.
It doesn't, at least not when I'm
Oh.
registered.
Okay. I would say that if you know anybody on the program committee, offline, I can give you an email address to ping to be like, hey, what's going on here? Because yeah, I'm not aware of that. For context, for those, for last year, for instance, we had a delegation from the Korean Methodist Church. So that's the Korean folks that their bishop came over here, and as well as several of their clergy and lay people. Their women gave a really lovely talk about the kinds of work that they do through the United Methodist Women, now United Women in Faith. So it's just really cool to be able to see different kinds of perspectives and areas of ministry. And the food's good too.
Yeah.
All right. So we touched on this a little bit, but there's really a couple of different types of annual conference sessions. We've been talking a lot about the business sessions, and really as a member of annual conference with voice and vote, plan to be present during all business sessions if you're able. There are very few, if any, motions that you wouldn't be able to vote on as laity, since we deal with the clergy stuff in the clergy session. And that's generally outside. And if you choose not to vote, then your church and its voice is not being heard. So we really try to encourage folks to be able to attend and participate fully. The second thing is that there are also really wonderful worship services, including opening worship, the retirement, memorial services, as well as the ordination service. And these worship services are just full of rich music, skilled preaching, and there's just a lot of significance in the life of our church, getting to recognize the clergy and the laity in Wisconsin for all of their gifts. And then finally, there's also Bible study. The Bible study sessions are optional. So if sitting for long periods of time is difficult, that is the one session that I would say that you would be okay to skip. And, you know, of all the things that's be the thing that I would skip. But still, the materials and the speakers are just really top notch, and it helps you get your day started right. So I would really plan to be there unless you have something that, you know, otherwise takes you away. The next thing is more on the experience of how to survive annual conference, because it can be a lot. There's a lot of note taking. Think ahead of time about how you're going to keep track of the events of annual conference to be preparing for your report to your church. Is that going to be taking a computer to do electronic notes? Is that a notepad, legal pad? I don't know what works for you, but make sure you have something to write on and something to write with. The next thing is expanding your circle. This is a really great opportunity to meet people outside your local church, as well as across the state and the world. This is a great time to also connect with former pastors that you might want to get coffee with because you haven't seen them for a few years. And there may be a lot of new people that you meet as well. Be open to those kinds of new connections with other attendees. The final thing I'll mention is that conference is exhausting. It's just a lot of meetings and sitting and, you know, making sure you are where you have to be. So think about how you're going to spend your downtime and take care of yourself. And, you know, the ways that you're going to recoup through the experience. For those of us that have, you know, been to conference before, what are some of the other suggestions for getting the most out of your annual conference experience?
Well, one thing that I have found with annual conference, and you're talking about expanding your circle and all.
Yeah.
We have done some phenomenal things at conference, networking with other people in the lay servant ministries program. Coordinating classes, talking about what's needed, and Matter of fact, it was from talking with some other folks that last year Cudahy came up with their Lay Servant Academy. And we were able to teach several classes at a time. Hi, AJ. Yes. One of our wonderful students down there, AJ. We will have classes this year too, AJ. Don't worry. But we really got a chance to coordinate things a little bit so that everybody wasn't doing the same thing and people missed out on things that, you know, we didn't do. So programs like that are really important to network at annual conference.
Yeah, there's a lot of opportunities like that. I'd say that United Methodist Women / United Women in Faith is another, really good, way to be meeting other chapters outside of your local church and area. The other thing is, man, I keep saying the other thing a lot.
In addition to,
there is also opportunities for mission at annual conference where we can be collecting donations for the Midwest distribution network for disaster supplies. The name is escaping me, but they generally have a truck there to collect blood buckets and stuff. Thank you, Carol. I moved here a few years ago from the West Virginia conference, and so I just kept thinking of what theirs is, which is not helpful in this context. And there's also conference offerings that they take up for different conference initiatives and agencies. Like they have a pastoral support fund for clergy in transition, as well as the Boy Scouts is one that I think was a conference offering. Bolivian motorcycles was one. Lots of interesting stuff. So also prepare that way. Would you like to contribute toward any of those? Anything else I'm missing? All right. So the final thing is preparing for post-annual conference tasks. The biggest part of that is preparing the report for your church based off of your notes and the summary that is prepared by the conference. And this report should be delivered within 3 months of attending conference. That way, people are able to know what happened while it's still as fresh as possible. And there's a couple of things that can help you in that preparation process. I'm actually going to stop sharing so I can show you some of them. All right, so the first thing is I want to show you what the annual conference summary document looks like. So once I make the Zoom happy, there we go. All right, so they create a news item with the annual conference summary and highlights. So on this page, you can see that they have some lovely pictures, the links to the videos. They record all of annual conference, even in years where you can only attend in person. This year will also be hybrid, so you can sign up to attend by Zoom in addition to attending in person. But regardless, they always live stream it so that if you can't go for whatever reason, or there's others in your church that are interested in what's going on but can't be there, that you'll be able to see that. They stream that on YouTube. And then they have some, different things that they highlight, like, budgets and worship services and lots of good stuff. So I'm actually going to take us to the summary document real fast. Here we are. So they've created this lovely 9-page document that contains a lot of, what goes on, and has, the links, exactly how many voted for, against each of the motions, all of that good stuff. So in terms of what you prepare, you could just distribute this annual conference summary, or, you know, send people to this website for like the news article on the summary and highlights. What I personally do is I create my own. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. All right, let's say scroll up to the top. I don't know why I was at the bottom, but I create my own document where I really want to have lots of pictures. I have my own way of presenting what happens at conference, because I think of it in four major categories. You have worship, ministry, the reports that are given, and then the resolutions that are voted on. So I just separate reports are things that we learn about more than like really approve and vote on. So sometimes it gets a little sticky, like you kind of put the budget with the reports, even though we do approve it, you know, whatever makes sense. But you know, I have a really fun time putting together this document so I can remember what happened at conference, and, you know, find good pictures. Like, you know, here from the ordination service, you get to see what that looks like, and recognize the people there, as well as just all the wonderful stuff that goes on, and as well as all the things that got voted on, and then I put little check marks for what actually got approved. So does that kind of give you some flavors of what you can use as a basis for your report? I mean, it's a wonderful starting point where you can put your own spin on it, or, you know, what you thought about things, in addition to what actually just factually happened. And I'll also say that I'm going to send out all these resources in a post-class email, along with an evaluation that I would really love if you filled out, so that we can make sure that these trainings continue to improve in the future. I'll make sure that you all have a copy of these so that you can be preparing as well. Gwen.
I just thought of something, talking about your report.
Yeah.
And, you know, after the votes have been made and everything, do you, in your report, do you ever indicate how you voted on something?
That is a good question. And it's a little bit sticky because you, as a lay member, that means that you're representing your church, but you're also representing yourself.
Right.
And whenever you get elected, like, they know who you are, they know what your views are, like, that's a big part of it. And I generally will keep track for myself of how I voted, but I don't put that in my document. And it really depends on what it is. For, you know, if somebody asks me how I vote, I would probably tell them, but I'm not going to really volunteer it, if that makes sense. I mean, another thing to think about is that, like, you can just see from all of the checkpoints on the left-hand side of the page that, like, practically everything just gets approved. So it's a lot of saying yes to things. And most of the time, there's very few no's that I vote on, if that makes sense. Not to say that I agree with everything, but most of the time it's, a lot of the votes are just kind of rubber stamp. But then there's others that really are sticky. Like whenever we had the responsible firearm legislation one last year, that was a sticky one where, you know, you're really weighing exactly what it's telling us that we should be doing and what this says about us and all of that good stuff. So does that kind of give you an indication of, like, yeah.
Yeah,
there any-
I just wondered. It just
Yeah.
came to me because I've never been a lay member, but I have attended conference often. And it always, I always think about that. Well, you know, when you go back to your congregation, you know, do you ever indicate how you voted? So, yeah, your answer is fine.
Yeah, I think sometimes it can be important to say that, you know, I just couldn't vote for this because I just didn't think it was right. And I think, you know, that it really depends on what it is in the context for, you know, how much you should tell about that. It's not like anybody is going to divulge the voting. Like they only say the clear numbers. It's pretty much anonymous. Although part of it is that you do the system we vote through, you do have like a login number. So you put your number in and then that allows you to vote. But that number isn't used to like see how exactly you voted to determine things. So yeah.
Mhm.
I think Patricia, you were gonna say something?
Yes, it slipped my mind again. Oh, I know. Were there any things that were particular that you're aware of that ahead of time that are coming up that will be more or less divisive, or something that we have to be more aware of, think about ahead of time?
Yeah, I think that the disaffiliation vote is really one where in some ways I don't think we have to think about it too much, because I know that from working with the conference trustees and everything that, you know, any church that gets on that ballot, I really think they should be allowed to leave, because they have exhibited, you know, pretty much a year of good faith working with us and, you know, making sure that they're protected, we're protected, everything. So in some ways, like that one really should be more along the lines of a rubber stamp. But on the other hand, we need to think about what that means, that these churches are stepping away from the denomination, that they will be responsible for finding their own pastors and determining if they're going to be their own independent church or if they're going to become a franchise for another denomination. All that to say that, you know, that's still going to be a very meaningful time, meaningful vote that shouldn't be undertaken lightly. So that is one where I think they're still working on exactly how they're going to do the logistics of that and give that the space and attention and gravity it deserves. Does that make sense, Patricia?
Yes, would the conference, they're voting, I think understood you say that they're voting all of the churches who are participating in the disaffiliation as one vote. And
Exactly.
so they can't pick and choose to not have a church disaffiliate. The conference doesn't have that power to vote on that.
Yes, it's a little bit different in different places. Different conferences have had their own pathways for how they do this. In some places, they have done it individually. So if you have 10 leaving, there would be 10 separate votes. But we just believe that it's easier to just have one, they're all treated the same. And, you know, we've just made sure that once people get to that ballot where their church is listed, that they have been fully vetted by the conference. So I don't think there will be questions about, you know, if any churches on that list are fishy, if you will, because we've just really been doing a lot of covering both for us as for them.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know it's a lot to be thinking about, so I definitely think those questions are valid, certainly. Yeah. And sometimes there's a lot of funny things. Like I took this screenshot from one of the recordings where they just kept laughing while they were reading out the change in apportionments. And it was just so funny. So, you know, I also try to find the humor, especially when I'm putting my report together to make it a bit more palatable. So yeah, there's also just a lot of ministry videos while we vote. So that can be really fun to see little blurbs from different colleges, different missions and ministries. The conference camps are always fun to see. So let's see. So I think the only other thing I would touch on, similarly to what Anne mentioned earlier, is that there's also a lot of opportunities for seeing the overall structure of the conference, as well as ways that you can get involved. There are things like Boom, there are different district committees. There's a lot of ways that you can serve outside your local church. So be listening for any call that you may feel to that kind of work. I find it to be really fulfilling myself. So just that's the only other thing I would be kind of have in the back of your mind, especially as you're looking through all the materials, and just be thankful for all the people that put all this time and effort into making it such an amazing experience. All right. Let me go back to my PowerPoint. All right. So we have gotten to our any last questions slide. You have my email and my phone numbers on the screen. So if you have any questions, please reach out and let me know. I would be happy to either help answer it or direct you to somebody who can. Well, with that, I'm going to go ahead and close out our session. We got done early. This is great. So let's see. Is there anybody who would like to read one of these two Bible verses for the road?
I'll read Ephesians 4:2-6. Conduct yourselves with all humility, gentleness, and patience. Accept each other with love and make an effort to preserve the unity of the Spirit with the peace that ties you together. You are one body and one spirit, just as God also called you in one hope. There is one Lord, one faith, one baptism, and one God and Father of all, who is over all, through all, and in all.
Thank you, Patricia. I think I saw Gwen raise her hand.
You know that those who rule the Gentiles show off their authority over them, and their high-ranking officials order them around. But that's not the way it will be for you. Whoever wants to be first among you will be your slave, just as the human one didn't come to be served, but rather to serve and to give his life to liberate many people.
Thank you. I got two more. Feel free to jump in there.
Should read the Matthew one. This is Sandra. I was hungry and you gave me food to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you gave me clothes to wear. I was sick and you took care of me. I was in prison and you visited me. Matthew 25:35-36.
Thank you, Sandra.
I'll take the Hebrews.
Go for it, Nan.
And we are reading from Hebrews 10:24-25. And this is the Common English Bible.
Mhm.
Let's also think about how to motivate each other to show love and to do good works. Don't stop meeting together with other believers, which some people have gotten into the habit of doing. Instead, encourage each other, especially as you see the day drawing near.
Well, thank you all so much for reading. And I would just encourage you to, be thinking about any other verses and passages that remind you that you are a beloved child of God and you are called to be a shepherd of God's people. I just thank you so much for all of your hard work and participation. This was so nice to get to meet all of you. And let's go ahead and have a closing prayer. Dear Lord, thank you so much for our time together and for all of the ways that we are learning how to approach this thing called annual conference and really listen for where we are called through the midst of everything that goes on. Guide us in wherever we are going from this place, as we prepare, as we engage with our local churches, and as we listen for the ways that you have called us to work in our churches and in the world. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
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 Thank you, Robin.
Well, thank
Thanks,
you.
Robin.
Thank you
Again,
so much
I'll
for
be
this.
sending a follow-up for this, and there'll be a recording of this session as well as all the resources that I showed you. So just thank you all so much for your time, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
You
Thank
too.
you.
Thank you.
Very
Yay! Bye.
much.
Oh.